It's a huge honor for everyone at Keeping It 100 to welcome a trailblazing performer and a bona fide wrestling legend, the one and only Vader, to the show to chop it up with us.
We were talking off the air about something that none of us even knew. You know, I live here in San Diego, so I'm always in LA for a lot of things. But we had no idea that you had lived or grown up in Compton, California.
Actually, I was born and raised in Linwood.
Right.
Born in Linwood at the St. Francis Hospital, and I was living in Compton when that occurred. And I stayed in Compton till I was born in the late 50s, so I stayed there for probably the first 12 years of my life. And
but what was the demographic? What was the demographic like in the 50s in Compton?
50s, I don't know. I
60s,
probably would say it was majority white. But
right.
as I was growing up in the 60s and even the early 70s, it was predominantly black and Hispanic and a few. I guess it was the minority was white. And the reason we were there is that my mother wanted to live next to her mother, and we couldn't get her to move. So that was just something that was part of the deal.
And what was it like growing up as a white guy in a predominantly black and Mexican, neighborhood?
Well, Vader time did exist, and so I had to bluff it, man. The bottom line was, man, you either stood your ground and fought, or you ran like hell. And I was a big fat white kid, and I couldn't run very fast. So, I ran when I could, and I stood my ground when I had to. And I got a number of ass whoopings, and I dealt out a couple too. But it was a tough way to grow up. And when I got out of, in other words, football, as a football player, I became wanted by a lot of schools, 30, 40 different schools, being recruited out of high school, going into the college ranks. And when I finally got to Boulder, where I'm here now, this seemed like Disneyland. It was, no one wanted to beat you up. And when you walked out your house, you didn't have to, see if the path was clear to get you a car. And,
Did you by chance see the movie Straight Outta Compton?
Oh yeah, man. Yeah, I sure did. That was.
Go ahead.
I think that was right around my time. I was probably prior to that, by about 6, 7, 8 years prior to all that happening. Because I remember Yoko Zuno and I were good friends. And I remember when he came to Japan the first time, dripping wet, about 380, and he was bringing all that rap because he was from that area, that Compton area, and he introduced me to an Eazy-E tape.
Wow.
And I said, "This is what's going down in my old town." And he said, "Yeah." And I don't think Yoko was living in Compton, but Yoko was close by. He was an inner city kid also. So we kind of hit it off on that basis, knowing what we went through growing up. And he was pretty much still living it because he lived, I think he lived in Carson. I'm not sure.
Bro,
so
he
was
was
all part of it.
Yeah, he was a straight G. The first time I met him, I couldn't believe all the respect he had on the street, bro. And he was real. And he also introduced me to this artist who I had never heard of at the time, called Master P. He was into all that gangster rap.
Yeah, Yoko was into all of that, and he would bring, every time he came back to Japan, he would bring a tape, and we would listen to it on the bus and so on and so forth, and until the Japanese guys would tell us to turn that shit off. They didn't understand it.
Let me ask you a question. Go ahead. Well, I was going to say, you were a big guy, obviously, growing up in that neighborhood, bro. Did trouble, because being a big guy and growing up in a predominantly black and Hispanic neighborhood, were people constantly challenging? You know how it is, where the big guy, everybody always wants to try him. You know what I'm saying? Did you fight a lot?
For me, growing up, it wasn't about necessarily winning the fights, because I was a bigger kid, and I would play with kids that were 13 and 14 when I was 9 or 10. So when we got into an argument playing ball or basketball or whatever the game was, we would get in a fight, and everyone would square off and say, okay, settle your dispute, and you would fight, and necessarily you didn't always win respect by winning, and it's the type of fight you gave up and you put up, and so I think that
right.
that's
They wanted to see
I wouldn't back down.
Yeah, they wanted to see what heart you had.
Yeah, it was all about heart, and would you be there for them if they were getting their ass kicked or in some trouble? Would you be there, and would you be an effective friend or gang member? And so that whole lifestyle is I remember it. I remember it vividly, and it and I obviously I prefer where I'm living. This is like Disneyland. I remember getting off the plane and taking that ride into Boulder. It was just a valley up against the Rocky Mountains, just beautiful. Yeah, the college was nestled up against the Rocky Mountains, and they were offering me this and this, and a full ride to school. And man, everybody was white and had money and were handing me money. So I said, yeah, I think I could do this. So this is where I came. This is where I stayed, man.
So the first time I ever saw you, Vader, was so impressive. You were in New Japan, and you had the headpiece that shot out the smoke, and you'd put it in the middle of the ring, and it was so way before its time. And who were the guys that when you got there that maybe tried to test you a little bit in the ring from the Japanese boys just to see what you had?
Well, Inoki, obviously he tested me. He story about Inoki, man. We were in the Sumo Palace, and I was supposed to fight Fujinami, and Fujinami just said no at the last minute, and really uncharacteristic about the Hall of Famer that we know now as Fujinami. He just said no. He didn't know what I was about. Right. And I think what he had said was, Inoki, we need to talk about this, and Inoki didn't really ever get to him. So at the last moment, Inoki just stood up and said, man, I'm not going out in the ring, because I had been introduced and was in the ring first, and Fujinami was supposed to come out. It was a sold-out Sumo Palace main event, and so Inoki had already fought and won and was backstage. So Inoki came out, right. And Inoki had not been beat for, I think, a decade. He had not lost a fight for a decade. And if you could imagine that type of power going into the ring and the Japanese support for that, and see, they believed in this guy, and back then, in Japan, things were still a shoot. The people believed that Inoki hadn't been beaten 8 years. Right. And so he got in the ring and said, Masa Saito went over, was yelling at Inoki, and they were like, what the fuck do you want to do? And Inoki said, tell him to knock me out. And I hit him pretty good about the 2-minute mark, and we went home. So, I mean, wow. This is my first match in Japan, brother. And I had been working in the AWA, and I had been working in Europe for a guy named Otto Vance, and I had been a world champion for him, over 3 or 4 time world champion over in Europe. But now, man, I come to Japan the first time, and I knocked this legend out, megastar. I mean, right. It was beyond, I don't have the words. I mean, you can take Hulk Hogan in his prime and multiply that times about 10, and that was Inoki during this 10-year run. Imagine,
Vader, he's a senator now in Japan.
Yeah, remember the Japanese diets. That's what I'm talking about. This guy was, so he said, not only beat him, but knock him out and beat him in 2 minutes.
Talk about making
Yeah, well, it did. I mean, and you know what? That investment that night, and Inoki knew how to make somebody, and he was out to prove Fujinami wrong. He had told the story later that Fujinami was second-guessing the system, and that he said we had done our research on this guy, and he knew that I would come through and would be able to work the Japanese style for the 20 or 30-minute matches that I would have to do. Right. And so, anyways, man, they started rioting, man. They were coming toward the ring, and they were in the Sumo Palace. They sit on pillows, right?
Right.
And So they took these pillows and lit them with their lighters. See, everyone in Japan smokes, or they did back then. You know, we're talking, yeah, everyone smokes, man. So they just took their lighters out and lit these pillows on fire and were throwing them at me. And the ring was full with fire pillows, and I'm going, is this part of the tradition? Or are they so pissed off at me?
Right.
And Master said, they're pissed off at you, and we got to get the fuck out of here.
Okay. Now, let me ask you a question. Since when you went to WWE and like you were doing the moonsault, right?
Yeah.
And, you know,
actually, I did that. I did the first one in the WCW, but go ahead.
Okay, yeah, but that's where like people first saw you doing it, and you know, which is obviously a smaller man move, if you will. And I remember like a couple months ago, there was like a lot of maybe controversy, and I don't know if maybe something you said was taken out of context, or that's exactly how you meant it.
Well, it was taken the way I meant it to be taken. I wanted to create heat. I saw this kid on, and you know, right now and for the record, forevermore. I saw Willow Spray working a match with, God, what's the other kid's name?
Ricochet.
Ricochet. And I went, my God, there's the future of wrestling. And you know what? You have to say that could be the history, you know, and really in hindsight now, I thought, well, that is the history, you know, that these athletic, gymnastic type athletes, you know, they're going to take over wrestling because it's so damn entertaining. And it was what I was watching was impressive to me beyond anything I had seen, because I think from where I started out, you know, in the 80s, and the stories that we told. I mean, my matches with HBK and with Mick Foley and The Undertaker and Sting and, you know, Inoki and Fujinami. I mean, the list goes on of all the great opponents I've had over the years, and you know, I'm very fortunate to have had them, but suddenly I've seen for the first time in my wrestling career, I see something that's new and something that was catching on, and it is catching on. So I'm thinking, you know what? First thing I want to do is what? Talk good about it? No, everyone's doing that. Everyone's kissing this guy's ass like he's the, you know, the heir apparent to wrestling. And so I thought, I'm gonna shoot him down and see what I can create. So I shot him down what I thought was valid critique. Because what they were doing, and if you look at that match honestly, they were spot monkeys. They just do spot after spot after spot. There was no real story told, and that part of my critique was valid. But other than the fact that it wasn't any good, and I mean that was all bullshit on me to piss everybody off, and I did. I mean I had the whole Twitter world pissed off at me, but it was by design on my part. So eventually I contacted this kid. And we were going back and forth pretty hot and heavy at each other. I said, "Are you serious about all this?" He said, "No, I'm just following along." I said, "Same here, man. Why don't we get together and do some business?" And he said, "Let's do it." So he contacted his promoter, and you know, $15,000 later, I went over there for a week and did up-team personal appearances, and I did 2 or 3 matches in some other promotions, and you know, autograph sessions in here, because it was like anything that. Any place I showed up prior to that match, you know, it just did great business. You know, him and I showed up at a little theater that held 400 people. And this was prior, you know, 4 days prior to the match, and it sold out, and there was standing room only. And we did a Q&A, and, you know, of course we shared the money on everything that arena. So, I mean, you know, I was getting the big hit. I was getting really knocked. You know, Vader's stupid and Vader's this. He don't know wrestling. I mean, I know wrestling as big as anybody knows wrestling. Believe me, I
you've wrestled everywhere on top. Yeah,
everywhere on top. I know what's good and I know what's bad. And what I saw wasn't just good. It was innovative. But in the same breath, every new innovative style has some problems, and I see one problem in that style is it's just basically it has no regard for a story. It's spot after spot after spot, and it is entertaining, but you never really catch your breath and go, "Wow, who's winning or losing here?" You don't really know, and that may be a negative. And you know what? The average fan today may say, "We don't give a shit. We like it, and it's entertaining. It's like one breathtaking move after another. We don't care about the story." And you know, if they're paying the dime at the gate, and they're willing to pay it, I mean, you know, who am I to say that's that's not the deal going forward? But again, you know, and so when I went over and fought this guy, he came in with this list of spots. He said, well, we're going to do this spot, and then we're going to do this spot, and we're going to do this spot. And I said, but you know, that's not how I work. I said, I'll try to adapt to you. You got to adapt to me a little bit. And he did. You know, much to his credit, he did adapt to me. We had we had a makings of what could have been a fantastic, you know, 5-star match. But I mean, literally, you know, 2 hours before the match, I couldn't stand up. I didn't breathe right. I mean, I had a bad back where, you know, if you ever had a bad back where you try to stand up and you can't, you got to bend over to get relief.
Yep.
And that's what it was for me, man. I was breathing, couldn't breathe, standing up straight, and I couldn't, you know. So I was laying on the locker room floor, and they said, well, you know, I'm stretching. How's your back? And I said, it's fucked. And well, you got to go. You know, now, you know, it's they had sold out the building plus 50% capacity seating, and couldn't get another person in that ring. So, you know, all in all, look what happened. You know, some worn out old man, you know, criticize some young kid, and
but that's a social media. That's a social media world we live in now.
Bro, let me tell you something too. Is that that's the wrestling fans today like live on the web. They're on the internet. I mean, they're not might not be a lot of people that actually go to the shows, but every wrestling fan is still on the web. And the best thing, bro, I saw the heat that you had when you were, and like you had legit heat, which is hard to get these days in wrestling, because in wrestling today the fans usually cheer both the guys, but they were chanting "F you Vader." F you Vader was good heat, but bro, think about that. Like this is like the landscape of wrestling. What's ahead? If you go on the internet and like to like basically call a guy a bad worker to his fan base, that's like the way to get heat these days. And it's like the funniest thing is that's almost like the way to work the heat. To work.
No, man, you know what? Let me tell you something. I went above and beyond that. I said I could take a high school kid, a high school gymnastics star, and teach him exactly what this kid was doing. And you know what?
That was
so far-fetched.
But I'm going to tell you, that's
so far-fetched.
It's far-fetched, but it's not that far from the truth, you know?
It's far-fetched.
No. This kid's got real talent, and this kid is going to be someone. Maybe he'll taper down these series of high spots that he's doing and create a little story, because, you know, I made him do that. I said, no, let's sit down and talk about this, and let's put in this and put in this, and, you know, we'll still get your spots in, maybe not as many of them, but, you know, you allow me to work in there. Because with my bad back and at my age, I mean, I'm just not the spot monkey that I used to be.
And bro, you took a lot of great bumps for your size, and then you were a great worker for your size too. Not good, but great. But here's the other thing that I wanted to say. No, straight up. But here's the other thing I wanted to say is that it's when Disco says it's not so far from the truth that you could get like a gymnast and turn him into a wrestler. Absolutely not. These guys are elite athletes at what they do, and they're not just doing gymnastics. They got to sell, you know, even though they don't sell in those things, they still got to sell. They got to protect their opponent. They got to protect themselves. They got to be in shape. There's so many, bro. It's not that easy to be a wrestler, but
I'm aware of that.
I'll tell you what really what is sad to me in Disco, Vader, is that, you know, they shouldn't get away from the storytelling, because every now and then I love to see, I love to see good Ricochet, Will Ospreay, no story match, but there's nothing like a good story.
Yeah, but maybe that's where it's headed. Maybe we're going into the spot monkey season or decade or era, and then maybe we'll go full boat into that, and then it'll phase down into, well, let's get back to the story. Let's keep the spot monkey stuff because it's so damn entertaining. And, you know, I'm not saying this is where it's headed. I'm saying it could be, because let's face it, what I saw that kid doing and what I've seen him do since is extremely entertaining. And, you know, if you can sell at a house with this kid doing flips and negating the story somewhat, if you sell out the sellout, and if it's hot, it's hot. Go with it. I mean, that's what the promoter's going to do.
And you know
Vader,
what? And you know what, Vader? One other thing. If you look at the WWE locker room in your head from 20 years ago, 15, 10, and now it's just much smaller. You know, the big giants that used to be around are no really longer around as much. It's a smaller wrestlers, younger wrestlers with that lucha, infused, high flying style. So it is going in that direction.
Bro, Vader, Vader, let me ask you this.
Well, that's where Vince is going too. He's talked to this kid, and Vince has got this guy in, jotted down for part of his future, I think. I mean, Heyman talked to him. Heyman flew over to England and talked to this kid about bringing him over, and the kid, rightfully so, and it's too soon. He's 23. He'll get ate up by, the older hands there in WWE go now. But as he gets older, that'll be an obvious move for him. There's something that's very, very dear to me, and something that just happened to me recently. I went to a heart doctor, and he said my heart's fine, everything's okay in that area, but that I had been taking pain pills, pain medications prescribed. I'm not saying I was taking these things illegally, because I wouldn't do that. I have more respect for myself and the law than that. But I was taking, I've been taking pain pills, and I've been taking sleep, opiates, and benzoids for a long, long time. And the doctor said, your heart's starting to show wear, and you're still 365 pounds, and you're closing in on 60. And Leon, one of these days you're going to wake up and you're going to have a heart attack. And then from that point, life becomes different. After a first heart attack, you haven't had one yet. So why don't we become proactive? Start being responsible for what you put in your mouth. And, I'd always depended on these pain pills and these sleeping pills to go to sleep, and the pain pills that, and you need them after a match. You go into, you really do, to deal with the pain and be able to go to the gym and get ready for your next match. You need them. But, so I basically got a wake-up call from this heart doctor saying, you need to get off of them. So they suggested that I go to rehab, and I went to rehab, and all the young kids in there, they knew who I was. And so I decided to be the father figure of the group. And, these kids are in there for meth and cocaine and all kinds of things. And, I was there for prescribed medicine, but it was the same thing. I was still addicted. And I had to say those words, that I had become a person that was addicted to medication. They were addicted to another kind of medication, but in reality, it was the same thing. So I get out of rehab, and I've weaned myself over to this non-addictive, in other words, it didn't do any damage to your heart. It was much milder. It was called Subutex, and I believe it's a new generation medicine on the market. And it basically, you take 1-3 times a day, and it controls pain, but it's not as effective. It doesn't control acute pain. And then for sleep, because I've been on sleeping meds, there's a new generations of sleep meds out, and and I'm going to screw up these names, but Maripine and Terazoxin and hydroxy. And so this was, in other words, when I got out of rehab, that they had put me on these meds and said, Leon, take these meds as prescribed, and you'll be able to sleep, but you're not going to be addicted. And then the next step is, a year or two down the road, we'll get you off these, and we'll get you off everything. In other words, when you're retired. And so I was using these meds because a doctor told me to. And here's my whole point, guys. You have to be, everybody, every wrestler listening to this, every young man or young woman listening to this, you have to be responsible for what you put in your mouth. So based on some doctor telling me it was okay to use these in conjunction, to use these 4 medications in conjunction, in other words, at the same time, that it would be okay. Well, it wasn't okay. So this basically had a toxic buildup because they were prescribed wrong to me. In other words, the pills, the medications by themselves were fantastic. They're great. But
in the system at the same time, right?
At the same time had a toxic effect. And one of the toxic effects one of the effects of taking these meds were you would hallucinate and you would see things that wasn't there. And you would lose your equilibrium and you would fall. And So I go over to England on these meds, and I wasn't myself. And in training, I hurt my back to where, and I just wasn't myself. In other words, I was just starting to be affected by these medications in England, and that was the whole Ospreay match. And yes, it was a good match, and I pulled it off, but it still wasn't Vader. It wasn't the Vader you're used to seeing. And I wasn't as snappy, and my back was hurt. And then I came back to Boston, and a good friend of mine, and I'll say his name, Kevin Nash, said, he called me up after that and said, "Leon, do you know what you did?" And I said, "No, I had no memory or recollection that I did this and I did that." I'm going to leave out the specifics, but again, my point is, we all have to be responsible for what you put in your mouth. And then I came home, and my roommate called my son and said, "You need to get here because your dad has slipped out." And I'm still taking these meds, and I'm making the problem worse and worse. But the doctor told me to do it, so it was okay. No, not true, guys. You really have to do your own research, and you have to go beyond what we've been used to. Konnan, you've probably had medications that were prescribed, right. The pain pill or whatever. But now it's with these new generation drugs. It's like they're trying to get everybody on these things and take us off of what we've known to be safe for years and years and years. And I'm not telling anyone what to do. I'm saying be responsible for your own actions and what you put in your mouth. Because what happened to me next was my son came. He flew from Dallas, and we're talking and we're okay. And he notices differences in me. And then I'm talking to the wall, and I'm talking to the love seat and the wall. And Jesse went, "Well, who are you talking to?" "Well, so-and-so's right there." And I was having a full-on blown conversation with somebody that I had known from my past. And so Jesse just sits there in amazement because this is his father. This is, Big Man Vader. This is Leon White, the college graduate, and just things like this never has happened. The father that he knew that raised him, that put him into college and paid for his college education, and the father that he looked up to in so many ways was talking to a chair. And so he said, "Father, I want you to go to bed." And I said, "Sure, I'll go to bed. And, I'm kind of tired anyways." And I said, "But why?" And he said, "Well, we're going to go to the doctor's tomorrow and figure that out." And so I walk into my bedroom, and my bed had been put together wrong, and part of the frame was sticking out. And I told you earlier that you lose your equilibrium and you fall. I fell into this frame, in this corner of the frame stuck into my leg, and I nearly lost my life. I nearly bled to death right there. Oh, I screamed, and my son came in, and this thing was it was sticking in my leg. We couldn't get it out, and blood was pumping out. It had severed 2 or 3 arteries. It cut a ligament. It cut a tendon, which is obviously, when you start cutting tendons and ligaments, and your ability to use your leg ever again properly is at stake. But I nearly bled left. My son managed to call 911, and they said, that your father probably won't make it. He's lost too much blood. And so they got the frame out. And that time, Jesse was trying to stop the blood, but he couldn't. So
did you go unconscious when that happened?
Yeah, I did. And so, I had been in contact with the doctor, and I've told her what happened. And, "Oh, you're blaming this on me? You're the one who prescribed the drugs." "Yeah, I'm pointing my finger dead at you and saying, I've hired an attorney, and we're going to be knocking at your door soon." And so fair warning. And
what are you doing for pain? Because if the first one's got you addicted and the other ones gave you hallucinations, what are you doing?
Well, I've done further research on the medicine that I went to rehab for, and there's good there, but you just can't take them together.
Okay.
You can take the Subutex by itself, and it will control your pain, but you can't take the other 3, and you can never take the 4 in conjunction, and because it just takes a very short time, and next thing you know, you're talking to walls, And you imagine doing that on the road in England. You imagine doing that on the road in Boston. I started out as a football player, guys.
Right.
And, that was going to be it for me. I was going to play 20 years of professional football, 15 years of professional football, and retire. And, I didn't get to do that. I played, 6 years in the NFL, and I ruptured a patellar tendon, and that was it for me. And I got into wrestling and was able to do this for a long time. So, although at one time I looked at myself as Leon White, the football player, the high school All-American, the two-time college All-American, the NFL first-round draft pick, and, the number one ranked center in the country, that these things were part of my past. I now had prided myself of being Big Van Vader, the professional wrestler. And that ability to entertain above all was so important to me. And I would never do anything to jeopardize that. This is really my reason for coming on is sooner or later, things I've said and done under the influence of these pills are going to get out. And I wanted to be forthcoming and say, things did happen. And I was out of my control. Something I had nowhere. I was taking medications that were affecting me, and I had no idea that it was even happening. And I had no memory the next day or moments after that I had done or said anything. And
it's amazing that you would share that, man. It's very brave, and I think a lot of people are going to learn a lot from this session. Do you agree, Konnan? Yeah.
Well, the main thing I just wanted to say, Vader, is we've been in the same dressing room maybe 2 or 3 times. We never really, chopped it up, but it's so interesting to hear what you've said today, because I think a lot of people after hearing this are now going to have you in a different light. And, we all have speed bumps in our life. We all make mistakes, all of us. The problem is most people won't own up to them. And you're coming out here and you're saying what happened, bro. And we got nothing but respect for you, man, for that.
Thank you very much. You know what? The fact I almost lost my life is certainly, utmost on my mind. But just the fact that, I blindly put these pills in my mouth and could have certainly hurt myself. But you think about the time in Boston and the time in England, think about who else I could have hurt. I mean,
right.
Somebody that, and that's what bothers me, is that somehow, something I could have done or said would have caused somebody injury or, harm. And that really, I'm a God-fearing man, and that really bothers me. And I'm very emotional about it. But
the good thing, Vader, is you identified it. You've gotten it out of your system where everybody knows, and we appreciate your openness, your candor.
I'm talking to all the wrestlers out there right now, man. You don't want to be a cliche. You don't want to. I mean, I respect all the wrestlers that have gone before me, and the Rick Rudes and the Rowdy Pipers and Kurt Hennings, and the list goes on and on. I can keep talking, and that in itself is sad. But
right.
The one thing I told my son when I was bleeding on the floor was that I didn't want to die and become a cliche, another cliche, or another wrestler dies before his time. Right. And that was the one thing, I don't drink and I go to the gym, and I want to live a long, healthy life. I want to live into my, my late 70s, my early 80s even. And for a big man, that's saying a lot. For someone that, I'm sitting here at 365 pounds. So it just, that's what scared me the most, was that, someone would read the fact that I had passed, or hear it on TV or the radio or something, and say, oh, another one of those wrestlers died. When are they going to learn? And that, wouldn't have been the case, but, it's now I get another chance, and hopefully by saying this, I've given someone else another chance. And that's where I'll close, guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vader. Thank you very much. I wanted to speak out on this incredible Vader interview. Pain addiction is no joke. So many great friends and performers we have lost in the wrestling and entertainment field to drug addiction, not to mention how many people we personally know who have had an addiction or been in rehab. This is no longer a football or sports or wrestling problem. It's widespread. I never took a pain pill or any other opioids until I was in my late 30s. When I wrestled in Mexico, no one took pills. When I first went into the NWA, then I'm talking about early 90s and WWE, I would actually look down on wrestlers or anybody that was addicted to them as weak-minded individuals until I got to WCW myself. And between a combination of pressure, anger, needing something to cope, I became what I hated, an addict. I never was in any public scandals where people were aware of it, but Somas, Percocets, Vicodin, Xanax, and anything you needed to get up, come down, extra energy. Another wrestler had it or a fan could get it for you. It was prevalent. And half the office was using it too. You don't know how many times I saw wrestlers shaking in the hallways and the dress rooms and airports, passed out, having to have another person carry you to the car, driving you around because you were a mess. You know, we were wrestling in pain with undiagnosed concussions. And I applaud the ones that never fell into that trap. But I did. I never went to rehab. I should have because I was too stubborn and proud to admit it. But I just quit. And it took a while. It was very hard because I would see how countless wrestlers would go to rehab, work the system, and get back on. So I was like, why am I going to go there? Because I'm going to do the same thing. But middle America now has a prescription pain problem, and now everyone is taking notice. Half the people with opioid addictions also have a mental illness or personality disorder. So Vader wasn't far from the truth when he was talking about this. I applaud Vader for coming out and facing his demons and asking for forgiveness. It was a very emotional interview that really touched me. And I hope you guys will visit his social media sites. On Twitter, he's on @It'sVaderTime. Send him some love and let him know you appreciate all he's done. It all starts with support.
In part 2, Vader gets in-depth about Japan, starting off with a story about being in the ring waiting for his scheduled opponent when a totally different opponent came to the ring for a match instead. Antonio Inoki, by the way, and what went down.
Basically, it's your first night, and here comes basically, Inoki was running the show still, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah, man, he was the hit guy. Yeah,
so did you think that you were going to have, maybe he's coming out there to fight you as a shoot?
Well, yeah, that with the atmosphere going, and your mind is doing 1,000 different flips and thoughts a second. And, yeah, I thought, well, hey, maybe Fujinami. See, I didn't know Fujinami wasn't coming to the ring.
Right.
I thought, well, Fujinami said no, so maybe this guy's coming out and going to beat my ass. And so I yelled at Masa in the ring, what the hell's going on, Masa Saito? And he was kind of like the guy that recruited me to come to Japan in the first place, and he was that was his role in the company. He was supposed to recruit American talent, and this was a new role for him. And because primarily Inoki was getting it. Well, the bottom line was Inoki was getting his butt kicked by Baba, who had entertained and brought in American wrestlers like Stan Hansen and DiBiase comes to mind, Harley Race comes to mind. Steve Williams, Bam Bam Gordy. Not Bigelow, but Gordy. And so, in other words, Baba was doing great business where Inoki's business had slipped because they hadn't adopted the American wrestlers. And obviously, the Japanese people liked the fight between the Americans and the Japanese. So, Inoki was bringing in me, which was going to be the first guy. And then we added guys, behind me and around me. And obviously, Bam Bam Bigelow came over, and we were tag team champs. And so they built, Owen Hart was another one. So we brought over some good talent, and of course, my man Yokozuna, our I call him Rodney, but
Japan was Rodney, and Japan was super hot at that time because both promotions were now hot.
Yeah, so now with Inoki taking a step to get the Americans, they were hot, and so I mean, just each company every night was selling out, and it really wasn't a war. It was just a matter of, who could sell out first.
And plus, there was so much great Vader. There was so much great talent because I remember you and a Bam Bam wrestling for the IWGP tags against Hase Muto.
Yeah, man. Some classic matches and classic talent and classic times. you know, I feel fortunate to have lived.
Let me ask you another question. Let me ask you another question, because this is something I don't think we've ever been able to do in the United States. But with Inoki and Baba, you know, so competitive, and you know, they're trying to outdo each other. How were you able to put together that Supercard show where you went against Stan Hansen?
Well, see, it's my memory, it was definitely Baba and Inoki, the Supercard. But right. I think there were other promotions involved. It just wasn't Baba and Inoki, but obviously them being the two major players, they stole the limelight, you know. But there was they were pretty fair about bringing the crews or the companies in there that, you know, weren't doing as well, say, or wasn't getting the notoriety that they were. So they would bring them along and help them. I think the Japanese philosophy was rather than stiff your competition, help your competition, and one day that may also help you. So a little different philosophy than what we typically saw in America, and especially with, you know, the dominance of the WWE, and, you know, how he handled those situations when the company was down, and of course the Monday Night Wars and things like that. So they helped their brother, and so that was a big show. And
yeah, because that was an All Japan guy. That was an All Japan guy against a New Japan guy, right? This wasn't something we were seeing normally, right?
No, exactly. But you know what? We were one of the main events, but we weren't necessarily the only main event. You know, Stan and I was. I think there was 2 or 3 main events that night. Stan and I was one. Inoki and the judo guy was another. And I believe Bam Bam was one with that big sumo wrestler, Tatao.
Yeah.
The big grand champion. That was huge news at the time. This guy was 6'8" and 440 pounds, and he switched over into wrestling, and that was huge for a sumo wrestler to do that. And of course, we all know that sumo wrestling is a work like, you know, just like everything else is, and so, you know, now it makes more sense than it did then, because the sumo wrestlers were supposed to be, you know, a way of life, and you know, for any of them to do that. So that pretty much was, you know, the old school sumo wrestlers, and then this new kid coming in and getting a lot of success early, and then jumping ships over into wrestling because it was more money.
To me, it was because I was a fan back then. I mean, I was a fan. Even though I was wrestling, I was a fan of Japanese wrestling because it's way, way better. And I just remember thinking, wow, how cool is it that, you know, you got Vader from New Japan, and he's going to fight Hansen from All Japan, the 2 toughest guys from each promotion. And politically, they're going to work together, something that we couldn't do in the United States. I just thought it was smart. And then, of course, the fight was fucking the match was awesome.
You know what, man? We did 30-minute draw, and we did every minute of that draw, and Stan knocked my eye out. You know what? You got to hear I was talking to Inoki before the match, and I said, man, I know Hansen's not going to let me get in the ring with that mask, because I didn't want to come down in the ring with the mask, and Inoki wanted it. Right. So I said, you know, Inoki, please, and, you know, any other thing that I would ask for, he'd give me. Sure, Vader, whatever you want. But this time he said no. He said, no, I want you to get in the ring and blow that smoke off, and whatever you got to do do it. Right. And I think that meant if I had to kick Stan's ass to do it. And so I'm getting in the ring, and Stan got introduced first, and I think that may have been, you know, he didn't like getting introduced first, and wasn't used to it, especially in Japan, because Hansen had godlike status, and you know, I'll even go, and it wasn't just a superstar and a legend. Stan was thought of like Inoki was, you know, to have that 10-year undefeated streak. And, you know, Stan was one of the baddest men on the planet, according to those Japanese fans. And so Inoki said, get that thing up there. So I'm walking up the steps, and Stan swings that rope over the top rope at my face, and that cowbell hits me in the nose and breaks my nose. And Stan says, well, I didn't mean to hit you. And I said, yeah, but you can't see past your hand, so why would you swing that damn cowbell at me, you know, when I'm walking up those steps? And I couldn't defend myself, because, you know, when you're walking up the steps, you're looking down at the steps to make sure you don't fall and embarrass yourself. So I'm looking down at the step, and he hits me in the face with that that cowbell, and it breaks my nose. And I mean, you talk about pain. So, you know, I dropped the mask like I knew I'd have to, and got in the ring and went over and slapped the shit out of him.
Right.
And boy, we started real hot in the corner. And so I had hit him 3 or 4 times really good, and I buffed his knees a couple times in that corner. And when he was going down, he thought, you know, that I was going for an early knockout, I guess, and was just going to just screw him. And he stuck his thumb in my eye, and it popped out on my cheek. So, I mean, you talk about, you know, it's 3 minutes in the match. My nose is broken. My eye's out of my cheek, so I shove it back in, and it's like, damn, I'm getting my ass kicked.
Right.
but
Vader, did that?
Man.
Did that help your career in Japan? That the rough, you know, just the buzz going in, the way you guys went at it?
No, it solidified it, man, because I was over, brother. I had already had the belt 3 or 4 times, and I had some real classic matches, you know, with some of the Japanese guys, Muta and Aussie and Fujinami.
Why did you end up leaving Japan to WCW?
Money, man. I mean, I had a family like everyone else. I mean, you know, I was making good bread. I was doing $15K a week, and Inoki was paying me, you know, he said he was paying me 30 weeks a year on that. And, you know, he said, I can't pay no more. He said, I can't justify to the television people who were the real owners and the real bosses. Right. Inoki answered to. Inoki ran the show, but the television company were the power and the money. He said, I can't justify any more money to them. I said, well, Inoki, I got to go, and I don't want to. Because we had a bond, like he thought I would stay there forever like Stan did. Right. And you know, he was paying me 30 weeks at that amount, but I was only working, you know, 18, 20 weeks a year. So it was a good situation, and maybe I should have stayed, kept that, and went home and worked independence. But, you know, my independent market wasn't that hot because I hadn't really done anything in America at that time. I had done some stuff in Europe. I was world champion in Europe. I was world champion in Mexico 4 or 5 times. And then
you wrestled Vader. You know what? I just remembered something. You probably don't even remember this, but when you were wrestling in El Toreo with Konnan and all those guys.
Yeah, Konnan and then Carlos Mayas, the promoter, yeah.
Yeah, Carlos Mayas. He actually passed away, one of the true gentlemen of this sport.
I'm sorry to hear that, bro.
Yeah, yeah. And so, anyways, I was in that promotion. What did you think about Mexico?
But I loved it. I loved it. I enjoyed it. Every time I went to Mexico, Inoki, you remember Neko-san?
Yeah.
He was a Mexican kid that looked Japanese. So Fujinami put him under his wing and brought him to Japan. He married a Japanese woman. He had a Japanese baby and really had become Japanese. But every time I would go there, Inoki said, Neko to come with me and make sure I wouldn't get screwed over. And not by minus, but by the other wrestlers.
Right.
And so it was a beautiful time for me. And of course, when I was there, business was good. I mean, this is a true story. I mean, Andre the Giant, and I'm very proud of this. And I wouldn't say it if it wasn't true, if Minus hadn't told me, but I broke Andre had the 1 week running record for attendance. Right. And I beat that. And I'm proud of that.
That is true.
I got all kinds of respect for Andre and wouldn't say it if it wasn't true. So
No. I know that for a fact to be true. And
and said, you know what, man? It was like, margaritas and the boys, like, we'd have a day off, and the boys said we'd come to my house, and all the other wrestlers would come, and we'd drink margaritas, and then we'd go out, and all the senoritas. It was Mexico at its finest, and I really enjoyed it down there. In fact, I wanted to move down. I wanted to move down there.
Yes, bro, the business was on fire back then.
Yes.
Yeah. What do you remember about? What do you remember about your time in WCW?
Well, that was the deal, because I went to Inoki and I said, "Look, man, I'm getting offered this much money, and it's full time, which means it's a lot more money than he was paying me, because he was limited to the 30 weeks." And
right.
And like I said, having hindsight, I may have stayed with Inoki and tried to build the independent market. I think Jim Ross had found me and scouted me, and obviously off that match from Tokyo Dome with Stan Hansen with the whole wife thing and that nature. And then we, Dusty obviously, was Dusty, was the brainchild. Like he put me in this match, and then he got me and Sting together and said, "Hey, you two can work. Do you think you two can work together?" And I didn't really know who Sting was, and I said, "I would sure like to." I didn't understand the magnitude of the star, Sting was, and Sting was more, hesitant. Said, "Well, he'd try it, but he wasn't committed to anything." And but boy, after the first couple of matches and the response, I've always been a heel that the one thing I tried to do was always, make my opponent, and certainly with Sting, there was a whole lot to make, and I consider that perhaps some of the greatest work I've ever done, or best work I've ever done, in that feud with Sting. And I was thankful, obviously that put me on the map in America, and it really gave WCW the ability to make the next step, and then obviously we saw what happened. Sting and I started, we blew it up, and next thing you know, Flair's back, and and you know what, that crew at the WCW, we have to give that crew, the Sid Vicious and the Rick Rude and the Sting and myself and Mick Foley and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That was a good crew. And then obviously everyone kept coming back, with Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan and that whole crew. So, I like to think that Sting and myself and that other bunch of people I just mentioned had a hand in all that, and obviously, where it went and where Eric Bischoff took it, it just wasn't meant to be. I guess it was just part of a corporate phase out, but the WCW was a hell of a company.
In our final interview installment with the Mastodon Vader, he gets right into it on Will Ospreay and Ricochet. So let's get right into it.
I do love these high spots these guys do. But, bro, I think it's a quick fix. I just think what they don't do enough is if you just taught these guys to sell more. And subtract more of the spots, add more of the selling, and, these death-defying things that they do, if they're sold more, then basically, that's where your storytelling comes in. I just think, bro, I love the acrobatics. I just think these guys don't think about selling as much as they should. They just think about, putting 24 ounces in a 12-ounce can, Let
me interject here to talk to your point. When I saw Ricochet in him, I thought, man, there's an area where I can really knock the style. Do I really think it deserves to be knocking? No. But I'm going to create a payday for myself because, look, I'm here as an independent contractor trying to do just that. And, anybody that says, well, shame on Leon for creating a payday for himself. Well, wake up, brother. The rent comes due every month.
Right.
And you know what? I created a payday for myself. We did great business for Ricochet. We did great business for Ospreay. We did great business for that promotion. I mean, the whole town was on fire. Everywhere I went, people were making money. Yeah. So, you know what? I made my money, and rightfully so. Yeah. I created the whole thing. And instead of me, getting a pat on the back, hey, look what this old man did. He watched the tape and created business for everybody by knocking this style, which he really didn't believe. And, if you can't see that, what my intent was, then, you probably don't know as much about wrestling as you really think, But what this kid did for me, he had this match all set up. And I said, no, let's revisit it. I said, let's take this spot and do this. After these three spots, let's do this. Slow it down and tell a little story. And then we'll go back to the spot because it's so entertaining. I want that. I don't want to lose that. Right. And then we created a little slower version, but man, it would speed up. It would speed up for him and then slow down for me so I could zero in on him and get the big tackle or the big move. Because that, let's face it, is at this point in my career, as much as he's a spot monkey and speed demon, I'm that slower, kick-ass type where I'll slow you down and kick your ass real good. And so we did a combination of both. And you know what? The people, you talk about heat, man, when I had Ospreay down on the ground and that kid can sell, I don't give a shit. He sell his ass up. Those are throwing shit at me. I mean, you talk about evil heat. Brother, I've never felt anything like that in my career, not in the Sumo Palace in Japan, not in Madison Square Garden, nowhere. I mean, the Tokyo Dome in Japan, nowhere had I felt that kind of heat. and all because I said some 23-year-old kid couldn't work.
But on top of that, you know, you had a rabid crowd. I mean, you've been in Japan, Mexico, you know, all these rabid crowds.
Yeah.
You had that local hardcore English Will Ospreay fan who hated you because they thought you were out of touch.
Hated me,
so, yeah.
Every time I hit him, and man, he would do a flip selling for me.
Right.
But I get hit in the back of the head with something.
Right.
And I'm thinking, man, this is going to get dangerous real quick. And I would let up. I mean, I'm pretty good at getting heat. And I'd be on him and on him and on him. And I'd say, hey, come out of it. And he'd come out and fight. Because I wanted that heat off me because that crowd was close. and I've been in too many situations like that. In Mexico, I had one crowd so hot. I mean, I got on one knee and put my hand around this guy's waist and said, hit me in the face. Keep hitting me in the face. And the crowd settled back down because they were about ready to come in the ring and kick my ass, and maybe permanently, because the Mexican crowds were serious. And boy, as soon as I got that crowd settled down, man, I pinned him and ran. We ran out the damn floor. They were chasing us all the way to the car.
Bro, and back then, Vader, if you remember, there was like almost zero security. You were on your own.
Oh yeah. Well, I had the Neko song.
Yeah. Well, that wasn't going to do Neko song. Wasn't going to do too good against 10,000.
No, but he knew when to. You know what he was good at? He knew when to run. He knew, look, this is about ready to go south. Let's get our asses out of here. He knew when to go. You know, having been there before. So.
Hey, Vader, with all your great contributions to the business, you know, outside the character Vader, when it's just Leon, does it bother you at all to be misunderstood by some of these newer fans or internet fans?
It really did. It bothered me. You know, even somebody that I've stuck up for years, Scott Hall, and you know, he's done shit where he's intoxicated or high, and I stood up for him on Twitter. I stood up for him as a friend. Someone I really thought was a friend of mine, someone that did me a solid when I was starting out. You know, he was pretty big news down in the AWA as Big Scott Hall, and I would fly in there and I could sleep on his floor and I could ride with him and Kurt, and that was a big solid. So next thing I know, I hear Twitter by my good old buddy Scott saying, you know, that this bitter old man creates some business for himself, as if that was a bad thing, and that did bother me because it's like, of all people, you know, our paydays at our age are few and far between. And for me to create something, you know, I really thought that everyone would say, wow, Leon's a smart mother bleeper. And he got all that business done. And you know what? We got a possible rematch out of it because, you know, it's a shame. It would be a shame to walk away from this business. And in terms of when you never leave a sellout on the table.
You never leave money. You never leave money on the table, Vader. But here's the problem.
There you go.
You know what it is? I think, I think everybody thought it was a shoot. Like you really were out of touch and you were bitter.
Maybe so. And if that's the case, so be it.
One last thing. What are you up to these days?
One of the things I'm doing is I'm writing a book.
Right.
Guy named Ken is my ghostwriter, and we're at 400 pages right now, right. And we're about ready to wrap it up and go into the publishing phase.
Right.
You know, I'd like to talk a minute about that if you guys could.
Yes.
Can we get Ken on the air? He was supposed to be standing by. Can we get him on the air to talk about the book for a little bit?
Yeah.
5 minutes?
Do you have KG, his contact?
Yeah, I know it's Kenny Casanova, and I also wanted to say to everybody you can get more information on the book at WOHW.com as well as VaderTime.com, and there's going to be more updates on that very soon.
We were talking about one story, and this is in Compton,
right?
And my dad and my mother were out at a local pub having a drink. You know, it was Friday night, and they had worked hard all week, so they weren't doing anything wrong, but it was late on a Friday night in Compton, and my sister and I were watching TV. And so I hear this noise in the back of the house, or the back of the apartment. We lived in an apartment. And I go back there, and they are, two guys are coming through the window. And I'm sitting there, and I'm frozen in my steps, right? And I looked at my sister and I said, run. And we went out that front door. Hold on, Kenny, I'm telling the story. I'll get right to you. I'm we're out that front door, and these guys are chasing us. They actually, they had a reason for going in there, and maybe it was my sister. I don't know. It sure wasn't my fat butt, but we run down to a neighbor's house, and of course everyone has guns, and he come out with a gun and ran him off, and we called the cops, and obviously my parents were called. So my mom didn't even come home, and this is the way I was brought up, and it'll shed some light on this book maybe. But my dad came home and said, well, your mother's stayed there. What's going on? We told him what had happened, right? You figure most parents would come home. My dad boarded up that window that they broke through and handed me a rifle that 30-30, loaded it for me, handed me the box of shells, and said, if they come back, you know what to do. And he walked out the door and finished part of his night. And so that's the way I was raised in inner city LA, and straight out of Compton. That story is straight out of Compton. So that's a true story. Maybe that tells people why I'm so crazy in the ring. But
right.
My dad was something else, man. Kenny, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Is Kenny there? Go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Ask Kenny.
Yeah,
man. Tell him about the book.
Yeah, we're here on the podcast. I'm Konnan, and Disco's with me, and obviously KG, right?
Yeah, and Disco, I got to say, you got a nice haircut recently. I appreciate that.
That is
Thank
a
you.
very, very, very gay comment that you make.
It's probably followed my Instagram followers, probably, right?
Yeah. So we've been talking with Vader here for a while, and great conversation. But he says that he's coming out with a book. You're helping him ghostwrite it, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I did Kamala's book, and he after we finished with that book, we raised him like 60 grand. He lost both legs to diabetes. Did a super job with that. Vader and I got to talking on Twitter, and we decided to write Vader's book. And man, I'll tell you, Vader's book is great. The stories. There's a lot of dialogue. You really feel like that you're reading a story, almost like you'd see on TV or a movie. You start out with AWA and moving over to Germany and then over to Japan and then WCW, WWE, back to Japan.
Bro, there's nothing, and I think everybody here will agree, than a great wrestling book, whether it's Jericho or Foley or Guerrero, whatever, because wrestlers have such interesting stories before they got into the business, during the business. And I can just imagine how great a read this is going to be.
100%. Now, you talked a lot about the wrestling side of things, Kenny. Do we get to learn anything about Leon White, the man, as well? Is it any like personal kind of stuff in there?
Yes, totally. I mean, I just heard him talking about the story, him growing up with the father and all, Compton and all that. We also get his football days. We get him training before he even gets to wrestling. You get to see Vader as the father. We've got guest passages in there by his son wrote something up. We also got stuff in there about Vader the Man from Jim Ross. We're waiting on something from Sting, which might be inserted last minute, which would be super cool. Mick Foley wrote a bunch about Vader. Yeah, Mick Foley wrote the foreword, and that's super cool too.
Let me tell you one quick story. I told you one about my dad and coming home, boarding up that window, handing me a gun and going back out. I thought that's crazy, man. I've told people that story, and they go, really? No wonder you're so messed up, Vader. But this one's about Brody. This is the night my son was born, and obviously my son is he's the love of my life, man. So he's born. He goes into labor Thursday. The match is Saturday, and I'm the main event down in Denver at the old Coliseum with Brody. I mean, we're talking about King Kong Brody in his prime, man, and wow. He's a scary dude. So it was questionable whether I was going to be able to make it, but I drove up screeching tires right in front of the front door, and I walked through the crowd, got a standing ovation, and basically went to the locker room, said hello to everyone, and walked up to Brody and said, my son was just born. You know what? If you're going to beat my ass tonight, well, you're going to have to earn it. And he said, no, let's take it easy, man. Your son was born, and it's your night, so we'll take it easy. And he was setting me up, guys. Let me tell you. So we, I was thinking, I'm thinking, hey, I'm gonna. He wasn't just good; he was smart. And So we go to lock up, and he kicks me right in the face and puts about 4 stitches in my mouth. So, yeah. So, you know, and we did. We had a very aggressive match after that. Probably the best match I've ever had with him. Because,
Vader, how long did it take you to get his respect where that wasn't happening anymore in the match?
Well, it happened that night, really. I got his respect that night because, you know, as a green guy come in, we all pay our dues and, you know, we listen and you know, Brody said, we'll do this. And then the match was set up for him, and he was using me pretty much as an enhancement guy. And then after this night, you know, because when I shook his hand and I told him after the match, I said, Brody, you shook my hand. And I told you that my son had been born, and I wanted, on the night that my son was born, I wanted to get some respect from you. And basically, you didn't think that was necessary after telling me you did. Right. So we went at it pretty good in the ring, and you know, he was a big tough guy, but I was like 420 pounds, and I could bench press 580. This was back in my heyday, right? And so I mean, I could do all of the things I could do, you know, throughout my career, but only I could bench press 580. So he was past all that. I mean, he was a big guy, but he wasn't lifting any weight, so you know, I could pretty much manhandle him in the ring, and so I did. I pretty much manhandled him, and I think I got the respect from that day on. And we started having some really good matches. And the same with Stan. The same evolution of things came with Stan.
It's been a wild and emotional ride for all 3 parts of our interview series with Vader. So if you missed out, peep up podcast1.com or iTunes to hear what you missed and peep that back catalog. Holla at Vader on Twitter at It's Vader Time and support that book when it comes out.